Why did Job and Jeremiah openly question God about suffering? Imagine facing pain so intense that asking questions feels like the only way to cope. Sometimes, even the most faithful people wonder why suffering happens and ask God directly. That's exactly what Job and Jeremiah did. They didn't hide their feelings or pretend everything was fine. Instead, they voiced their doubts openly. Why would they do that? Well, their stories show us that questioning God about suffering isn't a sign of weak faith. It's a natural response when life feels unfair or confusing. Job was a man who lived a righteous life, yet he lost everything: his children, his health, his wealth, in a short time. He couldn't understand why God allowed such suffering to come upon him. Job's questions weren't about rejecting God but about understanding why innocent people suffer. He wondered if God was aware of his pain or if he cared. Job's honest questions highlight a struggle many people face. How can a just God permit suffering in a world that seems so unfair? When God finally responded, he didn't give Job a simple answer. Instead, he reminded Job of his power and sovereignty, showing that humans don't always see the full picture. Job's story teaches us that questioning God can be part of trusting him, even when we don't get clear answers. Jeremiah's story is different but related. Jeremiah was a prophet who was called to deliver God's messages to a rebellious nation. Instead of praise, he faced rejection, threats, and even attempts on his life. Jeremiah questioned why the wicked seemed to prosper while he suffered for doing what was right. His questions came from deep disappointment and frustration. He knew God was righteous, but he couldn't understand why justice seemed delayed. Jeremiah's laments reveal feelings of bitterness and self-pity, yet they also show his sincere desire for God's justice to prevail. His questions weren't about doubting God's character but about seeking understanding amid suffering. Jeremiah's honesty reminds us that expressing doubts and pain to God is part of a genuine relationship. It shows a heart that trusts God enough to ask tough questions. Both Job and Jeremiah show us that questioning God about suffering isn't a sign of weak faith, but a natural part of being human. Their stories encourage us to be honest with God about our pain and doubts. When we do, we acknowledge that life can be confusing and painful, but we also trust that God's justice and goodness remains. These stories teach us that faith involves wrestling with difficult questions and trusting God even when answers aren't clear. When we face suffering, it's okay to ask God why and to share our feelings honestly. Doing so keeps our relationship with Him real and genuine. It also reminds us that God understands our pain and is working out His purposes, even when we can't see it.